Now, Kellyanne Conway.
Thank you all very much for being here, and I mean very much for being here, since it doesn't seem a very popular place to be. Someone called my office on my way over here and apologized for the low turnout, which really doesn't matter to me, because I've been part of movements that are truly from the ground up, where you want a table full of committed people rather than a flotilla of polite head nodders wondering when the next meal is. So I very much thank you, not just for being here, that's beside the point, but for being so committed. In fact, if you are a Republican on a college campus, you don't think outside the box, you actually live outside the box. And you've already overcome so many, I think, fundamental barriers in your early lives, in your young lives, that will serve you well no matter what you choose to do and who to be as the future wears on. One of my absolute favorite stories about being a college Republican is very simple. It happened, I'm 40, and it happened when I was 19 or 20, about 19 maybe, and I come back from my sophomore year at Oxford University, and it was the fall of 1987, so it was going into the 1988 campaigns, much like we're in right now, 20 years later. It was going to be a very competitive race. Ronald Reagan was term limited. There were at least 7, 8, maybe more people thinking of or declaring their candidacy for president. And I thought, here I am, going to college in Washington, D.C., but there was no, it's an all-women's Catholic college, there was no college Republican club. There was no college Democrat club. It just seems so odd that that would be the case when politics are so important, but also in Washington, D.C., of all places, where you would imagine that other young women like myself were at least compelled in part to come to the nation's capital because of their love for politics or government and the like. So I got together with one of my friends from Massachusetts, and I convinced her, figured it was no hard sell, I convinced her to start the College Democrat Club, and I would start the College Republican Club. And we ran into a big problem. I wasn't able to find a single faculty member who would sponsor us. And you needed the faculty member to be recognized on campus as a club so that you can book a meeting room, maybe get a $50 fee towards, cheese cubes and crackers. And it could not find, none of the nuns would do it. They just couldn't believe I'd come back from England with pictures of Ronald Reagan and elephants and all of that, and they wonder what happened to me over there. And nobody would do it. And finally, this very self-avowed liberal professor who looked like he had just walked right out of Woodstock raised his hand, and he said he would do it. Even though he disagreed with everything we stood for, he believed that our right to express ourselves and to assemble and to promote our ideas on campus and encourage other people to do so was more important than his personal political philosophy. And I've credited him for that. By the time I graduated a year and a half later, the College Republican Club was the largest club on campus. And I think it's a wonderful example of how the old saying in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. Sometimes the getting started is the most difficult part because there's safety in being the same. Taking a risk is it's frankly very un-American. Americans love to pretend that they want to join a revolution and make a choice and make a change and exercise an option, and they really never do. They go to McDonald's every night and order number 3. We've made it so easy, they only have to articulate the number. They don't even have to say what the burger is. And they're not even feeling groovy enough to say, I think tonight I'm going to do something wild and crazy and get the filet of fish. It's always the same thing. So if we're creatures of habits that way, you can imagine how it is in the political system. I see a lot of demoralization among Republicans around the country. I see a lot of it on Capitol Hill among members. And my one response to that is stop feeling sorry for ourselves. Buck it up and move forward. Why do I feel that way? Sure, there's been a diminution of the Republican brand, there's no question. And like any brand, most of what I do in my work is non-political, non-candidate work on purpose. I like people who pay their bills. And if I only know what 50% of the country is thinking, voters, then I don't know what the rest of the country is doing and thinking and eating and wanting and expecting and wearing. And because most people, unlike us in this room, most people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm a Republican, so today I'll do this, or I'm a liberal, so today I'll sleep till noon. Most people don't wake up in the morning and look at the world through a political prism. They say, I'm late for work, or I'm a mother of 3, or I'm worried about grandma in the nursing home, or I'm not sure what my major should be, or I can't lose those last 10 pounds, or I don't have enough money this month. Whatever it is people are saying, it's my job as a survey researcher to collect that light and reflect it back to them and to tell people involved in politics at any level, that politics is meant to respond to culture, not the other way around. The political class shouldn't make these rules and regulations and then expect us to learn them chapter and verse, hire our own personal attorneys and accountants to figure them out, and then conform the way we worship our gods and school our children and use the money that we've earned and how many pieces of toilet paper we use in the bathroom and all the things the left is trying to impose upon us. And I think that's an important thing to remember, because guess what? There's no question the diminution of the brand exists, that there are fewer adherents of the Republican brand. There are people who have been using the Republican product for years, who last year were what I called conscientious objectors. They stayed home in 2006, not because they weren't paying attention to politics, but precisely because they were. And they thought, let me punish the people who are spending like Democrats, who are creating new entitlements like Democrats, who are not having much of a military and defense clear foreign policy to explain to us like Democrats, and the list goes on and on. Ethical lapses like Democrats. But that doesn't mean the conservative brand has been diminished. And I want to make this point because this is the College Republican National Convention. I understand that. But let me explain that at the core of the Republican movement is a small c conservatism. Even if you personally say, well, I'm pro-choice, or I have a little bit of problem with an absolute right to the Second Amendment, perhaps you feel that way, I don't know. But the point is, and you still consider yourself a Republican, that's great. The point is that because that the Republican Party is at its core a small c conservative movement, because the nation at its core is a small c conservative people. How do I know that? Well, think about, if I had to draw for you a little chart right here, I call it the palatable political spectrum. Think about the way you see most news stories cast. It's Republican versus Democrat. Anything in Washington is Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. Why? Why is it not conservative, liberal? That's okay, thanks. She's pretty and smart, and Republican, and from California. I'm from Nebraska. There you go. Go to school in California. And the reason that most stories are cast Republican versus Democrat rather than conservative versus liberal is because the percentage of Americans who identify themselves as Republican is about 33 to 36%, depending on which poll you look at and depending on what kind of mood people are in. The percentage of Americans who identify themselves as Democrats is about 38, 39%. But the percentage of Americans who identify themselves as conservative is 43%, and the number of Americans who identify themselves as liberal is 21%. So think of what an imbalanced, unfair fight it would be if every public policy issue, if every news article covering it therein was cast as liberal versus conservative. Even the liberals don't call themselves that anymore. They did all these focus groups and polls and touchy-feely brain scans, and they came up with the word progressive. They're progressive, which I thought was an auto insurance, but they don't use the word liberal. They're progressive. It's something new. The S's just roll off your tongue, and it's cool and new and cutting edge. They're afraid of the word liberal because they know only 1/5 of the country, which by the way is the high water mark. It was in the 17, 18 percentile for years, but it's up to 21%. But 45, 43, 42% of the country, over 40% of the country for the last 15 years in a row have called themselves conservative. And we are as a nation. We do believe in local law enforcement. We do believe in the rights of the individual. We do believe in personal responsibility. We get on mass transit and presume that nobody's going to open fire. We're a pretty decent, civic-minded society. The only time you will hear conservative versus liberal or conservative be the standard bearer in coverage is when the media or whomever can choose the adjective that precedes Republican, like right-wing or Christian crazy or Bush-loving, has to be something that they look upon as derogatory. But we already won the ideological debate, and I would submit to you that's a better place to be in than to have the numbers at the governor level or the state legislative level, and certainly here in Congress. And if you don't believe me, let's go back to 2006 for a moment as a way to look forward. Could anybody please, I will give you $1,000 if you can, within the next week to 10 days, if you can come up with one candidate anywhere in this country. All I need is one. I don't need 10, 15, 20, or 2. One candidate in this country who actually stood up and ran for Congress or Senate and said the following: if you elect me, I promise I will increase your taxes, increase the number of abortions, and take your guns. Please find that person for me, because you will not find that individual. Nobody stands up and says, I'm going to raise your taxes. The last person who did that, Walter Mondale, said, the truth is we're both going to raise your taxes, but I'm honest about it. And people are like, no, I don't think Reagan's going to do that. He hasn't yet, and gee, it's not really part of his plan. And he gave his Proposition 1 in California, which failed, and then Proposition 13, which passed. It was the whole progenitor to the modern taxpayer citizens movement. So don't think so. So people really haven't said it since. And but where is that person? Where is that person who subscribed to the liberal philosophical orthodoxy as a way to try to win back the Congress and the governorships and state legislatures? No, what did they do? They ran commercials as the following, and I'll quote for you. 2 different commercials in a row. Quote, I'm pro-life. No, excuse me, let me start from the beginning. This election isn't about Nancy Pelosi or Hillary Clinton. It's not about name-calling or made-up labels. That's what they're good at in Washington. Here's what I believe. I'm pro-life. I believe in a traditional marriage and the Second Amendment. I'm a sheriff that supports our troops and thinks it's time for leaders who listen. A different message. I'm a sheriff who's used legal wiretaps to catch criminals, and I support using wiretaps to track down terrorists. I'm against amnesty for illegal immigrants. It's wrong, and I've always opposed it. Unfortunately, that wasn't President Bush speaking, but it was a Democratic congressional candidate, Brad Ellsworth, who successfully beat an incumbent, John Hostetler, in Indiana by double digits, running as an unapologetic, rib-rocked conservative. So think of who the candidates were in 2006 and who they were not. They weren't the people saying, I'm going to increase taxes, the number of abortions, and take your guns. So sure, who gets all the FaceTime? Who gets all the squeaky time? Who gets all the cute sound bites? Well, the people who are feeling, not thinking. The people who are reacting with a sound bite rather than presenting a policy, a sophisticated policy. The Learjet liberals who fly around the world in support of the earth, all the while, adding pollution to it in their private jets. And this is important to expose people's hypocrisy. The Kennedy Catholics, who still with the Eucharist lodge in the back of their throats, will fly to Washington to march for women's lives or to talk about why the rich don't pay enough in taxes. What I would say to all of you is to remember that if your philosophy, the four core pillars of the Republican Party, the Republican movement, frankly, are still intact, and that we're bringing on more adherence to that philosophically, then what we really need to do is just make the Republican label more palatable. How does that happen? I actually think, and I've said this to people, some of whom want to listen and some of who don't in the party, but it really starts, the younger you go, the more possible it is. Because everybody in this room can read history. You can learn history by reading it, by talking to those who have lived through it. You read about and learn history, but the only way to deal with the future is to live in it, So you can learn about history, but you must live in the future. When I see young people, I think that some of the political professionals say, well, they don't vote, they don't pay taxes yet, they don't have kids, they don't have mortgages, they don't know enough until they're 30 to really participate, so why market to them? Well, the answer is very easy. In branding, in non-political branding America, we know that if you use the same brand twice, by the time you're 20, you more likely will stick with that for life, or at least most of your adult life, than not. The same thing is true with the politics you choose. And on college campuses, the fact that somehow you've been able to slip through the morass of lemmings who pretend they're independent thinkers and all say the same thing, right in a row like bobbleheaded dolls, that means that you are independent and entrepreneurial enough to take that to the next step, which in my view demands 2 things. Number 1, you going right to the Republican parties of your states, of your regions, certainly at the national level, and saying, we young people, we college Republicans, we don't want just a seat up in the mezzanine. We want a seat around the strategy table where our elbows are rubbing up against it. Because I guarantee you that you will have a perspective that so many of us lack just by virtue of your day-to-day experiences. The old saw I've written about how, you've got these young kids like you're intellectual whizzes for sure, but you're these technological geniuses, and you can take something apart and reprogram it and do a whole new web page in 5 minutes or less, and and all of that. And we've got 12 o'clock blinking on our VCRs. And all of that extended into other areas of life. It's very true where just as you may think you can benefit from an internship or finding a mentor within the Republican Party or a Republican who's a business owner or who does something else that interests you somehow, public policy individual, a field that you like and want to pursue. Just as you can benefit from their instruction, I'm telling you they can benefit from yours. One thing we do in corporate America is to teach the CEOs to not just whiz by and keep forgetting the names of their interns or of their entry-level employees and not to have the door closed, but to actually take one on, sit down for 30 minutes over a quick bite in the CEO's office, and I guarantee you by the time 2 hours elapses, the young person has heard all about what it took to build that business and the worst day in the business's history and what the vision is for moving forward. But the CEO or the whomever, the senior muckety-muck, has learned so much from the young person, just sort of scratches his head and said, I didn't know that. I didn't know that 49% of Hispanic households in this country have children under the age of 18 living in them. I didn't know that you go to school with so many Asian kids. I thought they all lived in Hawaii and California. I didn't know that means the most simple things to people like you who live it every day. I didn't know young people knew what Mr. Ficca was. I just thought it wasn't until you got the 4 magic M's, marriage and motherhood and mortgages and mutual funds, that you started to pay attention to politics. But I guarantee you they will learn something from you. They are technophobes, many of them, and they will learn something from you. So don't be afraid. The worst thing that can happen is if you call one of Dad's friends or you write a letter to the RNC or the state party and ask to volunteer or say, I'm coming through Columbus, Ohio, later this week, I was hoping to stop by for 20 minutes and have a cup of coffee. If the person says no, you'll remember that, and you won't do the same thing 20 years from now when you're the one being asked. The second thing big you can do, and I mean this is the biggest thing any Republican, but particularly a younger Republican who, quote, doesn't fit the part. By virtue of your age and your college life alone, you've already defied a conventional stereotype in a major way. So the thing that somebody who, quote, doesn't fit the type can do is constantly have a 7-second version, a 7-minute version, a 7-page version for somebody who wants to read it. Answer the question even when not asked. Why am I a Republican? Why? Because if I had you all write it down, we'd come up with as many responses as there are people in this room. Some of you say, I believe in limited government. Some of you say, I think we're doing the right thing in Iraq. Some of you will say, because I'm not liberal. Some of you will say, because I love Ronald Reagan. Some of you may say, because I want to be an entrepreneur and I just don't see it happening if the current tax and regulation and healthcare system remains as it is. Some of you will say, because I think this country's lost its family values, its anchoring, its moral moorings. Some of you will say, because I believe marriage is between one man and one. Whatever it is, think of all the diverse responses we can possibly have. Some of you may say, because my mom and dad always were, or some of you may say, because my mom and dad weren't, which is confounding the heck out of some of them, by the way. They have no idea, some of these parents. If they come up to me in one more speech and say, I just have no idea what we did wrong. I fed them nothing but granola and hummus, and we did nothing but talk about how wonderful Bill Clinton was, and John F. Kennedy was on he was deified on our walls, and here I raised Genghis Khan. How did that happen? I'm like, for precisely the reasons you just cited, but next. But in any event, what you can do is you can tell people why I'm a Republican. Why? Because when people encounter politics, which congenitally, naturally, is a very foreign topic for them, and you know how it is, I call them the wrist flickers. You'll run into people and they say, oh, politics, they're wrist flickers, because it's easier to flick your wrist or shrug your shoulders or fall asleep than to think about it and learn about it. It's easier to sit at Starbucks looking over your navel, all happily, and saying politics this and Hillary Clinton that and abortion this and gun control that. And then all of a sudden on Wednesday, November 6th, they're the first people to say, oh my God, was that yesterday? They don't even participate, which is fine, by the way. I think implicit in your right to do something is your right to refrain from doing it. I'm actually one of the few people around who will publicly say, I'm happy more people don't vote, because they don't want to, let's just say, because they decided not to. But the point is, you have an opportunity because you look as they do. You are peer-to-peer, literally eye level to eye level, sitting in the same classroom, walking across the same campus, hanging out at the same bars and coffee houses. And so what they will say is, you're involved in politics, Republican, oh my God, you must be rich. No, I have student loans. That's why I'm a Republican. I have student loans, and I'm wondering why. It's so disarming because it's as simple as that. Rather than always have to raise the decibels or get angry or insult people. I know that's very de rigueur in some conservative circles, but I think it's sad. Because we have the policy arguments. We do make sense. It just takes longer to explain because it's harder to be us. And don't forget that it's much easier to be them. You just have to slobber a soundbite once in a while. You have to say, I love trees and puppies, not unborn babies, but puppies, and caribou and elk in Alaska. And I love red-headed cockatoos. And I love, but not grandma and grandpa at the end of their lives. We don't love them. Jack of Work can come in. But, and it's just easy to be them, to say, yeah, you get the point. But in the end, people look at politics and look at people involved in politics, whether you're running for president or whether you're my colleague in a college class, and they ask themselves two questions. Do I like you, and are you like me? And the do I like you is a pretty easy one to figure out. It means, do I want to hang, like you do with any other relationship, do I want to hang out with you? Is this fun? Do we have stuff in common? All of that. In politics, it's really, do you pass a living room test? Do I want to live with you in my living room and on the front page of my paper for the next 4 to 8 years? Will I be proud if you're part of my circle or you're representing me around the globe? But the second question is really the key to most people, whether they decide to get involved or engaged in politics or not. The second question is, are you like me? That's the connective tissue. That's the part that suggests to someone that you have a commonality, that you share something. And for you, being in the tough den, living in the tough dens of people that you do on these college campuses, I think the are you like me is a really important question for you to present to folks and answer in a way without asking it and answering it, which is, yeah, I have student loans too, or I got a C in algebra myself, or no, I came from, my mother raised me and she was a feminist, but here's what I believe. Here's why I think it was a shame in the 1970s that everything was woman-centric and not child-centric, and who needs a man in the house, and it turns out lots of latchkey kids were saying, I do. For whatever your reason is, geez, I'm gonna graduate and I'm gonna be forced to take the job that pays $10,000 more, even though I like it 1,000 times less, because of the tax bite. Because the fact that Uncle Sam and Big Brother just presume that they're part of my family and they want their fair share, so they say. So it's very important for you to say, here's why I'm a Republican. And for you, the next time you go to a college Republican convention, to get one or two people who a year before said, I hate politics, I don't like it. So tell them, it's our chance to go to Washington for a couple of days. Just come and listen to a few of the speakers. We'll hang out, you'll laugh. We'll have a good time. They've got lots of social activities. You might be able to meet your congressman or whatever. What do you have to lose? We'll be together. That's the way movements are built. That's the way people feel like a frank and connected peer identity, kinship with someone else, and they go with that. The other thing that you want to say, frankly, is that when you were born, whether it was 18, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, you were born into debt, not of your making. And if you think of what your children will be born in, the moment that they're born and it's the proudest moment of your life and they let out that first squeal, and maybe they're squealing because they know they're going to be born with about $25,000 worth of debt, it's your generation that's going to have to stand up and say, look, America, you've been living off your credit cards, you've been sucking dry the resources of Social Security and Medicare for a long time, and now we've all got to make some tough choices. That true solutions, true transformation, not this window dressing stuff, requires shared sacrifice, patience, and vigilance. And that if the solutions are not permanent, the problems will be. And finally, I would say we all have to stop looking like we've been sucking on a dozen lemons. Everything's always so gloom and doom. And it's a trap we all fall into, mea culpa. They present you with something negative like, Bush doesn't have a clue in Iraq, or aren't you guys all against women and poor people and minorities? And we end up saying, well, no, I'm not against all minorities and women. And it's just like, you got to smack that down from the beginning and say, isn't that a convenient excuse for not thinking about the public policy implications of what's really facing our generation? And it'll be so important, even when you got to tell other people, particularly liberals on your campus, you may have an opinion, but do you have the facts? And when you're armed with facts and figures it is remarkably transforming at how unignorable and unarguable some of the things you present are, and then you can source them, you can email them the articles, and it really is very transformative. Thank you very much. I'm sure we have time for questions, and I very much appreciate your commitment to the Republican Party. Thanks. Yes.
My name is Laura. I'm with Police Policy Institute, so as you can see, I'm a fan. A lot of these women and gender studies departments at our universities are nuts and kind of think that they represent women when they really don't. What can you give us as advice to students to combat these radical feminists that are on our campuses?
Yeah, a couple things. The question is about, with these gender studies people on college campuses and whatnot. There's a reason the National Organization of Women won't release their membership numbers, because they know numerically they should be the National Organization of some women, NOSW, or few women. I think the best thing to do is have facts and figures. Here's a fact that I find very disarming to the media, who like to call me about the gender gap. And, aren't women Democratic, and don't they decide who the next president is, and won't they vote for Hillary Clinton and everything? And I say very candidly, women have been a majority of the voting electorate since at least 1972. It's probably more like 68, but I'll give you 72. And 1972, 76, 80, 84, 88, 92, 96, 2000, 2004. 9 presidential elections. Democrats won 3 of them. Women were a majority of the electorate all 9 times. I'm not genius to know that. I just sort of added it up. I can count every 4 years. And they say, yeah, but if you don't take the pro-life plank out of your platform, won't that be not true this time? It's been in there for about 25 years, and that was 1980. You go through the whole list again. Yeah, but isn't it different if a woman runs for president? No, because Carol Moseley Braun did, and the pro-minority, pro-woman Democratic Party laughed her off the stage. If they were serious about representing other people other than rich white men, they would have nominated her. They would have given it to her and saved the money and given her everybody's resources. Elizabeth Dole would be president now if women voted for women. You've got that. The other thing you've got is, because those gender studies feminists are so entrenched with abortion, it really is a religion to them. Even if you're not talking about it, they always are. You have to recognize that if you were, Roe versus Wade is 34 years old. So if you were really passionate about it and you were in your early 20s, you are about 56, 60 now. There are more women in this country who care more about Roe versus Wade and abortion and talk about it like it's a #1 issue to normal women. And they talk about it, and yet they are physiologically incapable of bearing children. They're more concerned about it than women who are in the prime of the childbearing years, all of whom have seen sonograms, and some of whom are having a hard time getting pregnant. And so the people who care about it are no longer in the affected class. And I think that's literally going to start to age out on that issue. The other thing is, I always love to say to those gender studies people, if you say abortion or stem cells or guns one more time, I'm going to perform one of those on you, because, with a gun, because you, by implication, are suggesting that women can't do the math. I haven't heard you say a single thing about taxes and spending and regulation and kitchen table economics. Women make 81% of all household consumer decisions. We know they know how to do the math, but it is insulting to engage in debates that don't include women as full-fledged participants in a democracy and a culture where economy and finance is more important than these cappuccino counter cocktail party arguments. And I love challenging them on that, because they won't go there, because they wouldn't know chapter and verse of tax policy. They only know to say the rich benefit from tax breaks, which is a joke, of course. They only know the sort of top of the line 50,000-foot viewpoint that they get from the talking points. But they adhere to what they know will raise money for them. And I would challenge them to do the math. The other thing you want to tell them is 1 in 11 women in this country right now, as I stand before you, is an entrepreneur. Either owns her own business in whole or in part, full-time or part-time. And entrepreneurship is an explosive trend among women in this country. And it's not because they're worried about abortion and guns and all. It's because they want some flexibility, short of telling the government to demand it of employers. You must put a child care thing here, and you must have meditation music for my 2-year-old and all that junk. No, they mean that the lacking of flexibility, of an ability to contract with a private employer to get some flexibility, means that they're just creating their own parallel track. And if women are entrepreneurs, if 22% of all first-time home buyers last year were single women, and 6% of first-time home buyers are single men, it tells you that women are starting to amass the natural accoutrements of an ownership society, of a stakeholder investor society. We ought to respect that, and we ought to start addressing those issues. The last thing, go look at everybody's polls from 2006. Mine, Gallup's, Washington Post, Fox, anybody's poll you want. Anybody who responsibly dared to ask the question, which of the following was the most important issue to you as to why you voted today? Abortion was number 8 on a list of 10. I mean, imagine that, think about that. You wouldn't know that, but it makes sense because it's not something, and the reason I keep mentioning abortion is because it's all they talk about. It's all they ever want to talk about on these campuses and these gender studies. So I think you've got at least 5 or 6 different angles just to keep the gun loaded and keep shooting. The financial facts, the entrepreneurship, the ownership society, and the fact that women tell pollsters how less important this issue is. And if they did say it was important to their vote, they're more likely to be pro-life than pro-choice. Yes?
I just had a quick question. Besides your own company, what are some good resources for accessing these statistics that you're talking about that support our conservative views?
It's a really good question. I wish I had a better answer. I mean, the real talk I love to give is about the good, the bad, and the ugly of polling, like a consumer's 4-point guide to the polls, because there are some out there that are helping to make bad public policy, and it all comes from polls. You know, they're asking feel-good phraseology. Do you support or oppose campaign finance reform? And it's like 82% of the country supports campaign finance reform, but you get the same answer when you ask the question, do you support or oppose protecting the environment? Do you support or oppose winning the war in Iraq? Do you support or oppose improving the quality of education? And then you've got politicians and, frankly, rank and file folks like us in this room who see, oh my God, 80% of the country supports protecting the environment. I'm on the wrong side of global warming. That's not what the question asked. That's not what the question asked at all. The question asked, do you support or oppose protecting the environment? It basically asked, do you like trees and parks? That's all it asked. And when I see questions like, you know, do you support or oppose winning the war in Iraq? Although I guess there are some who would say oppose. When you get like 75%, you're like, well, who the hell are the other 25%? It's not even a good question. So I struggle to just give you a source. I think if you're a political junkie and you want to look at the horse race numbers, which frankly are the least relevant until closer to the election, you want to go to realclearpolitics.com because they do a really nice job of assembling private pollsters who are allowed to release their data, not always the case, and media polls and academic polls, and showing you like the running average and showing the greatest variations. There is a bi-monthly, almost newsletter type of publication called The Polling Report, put out by a guy by the name of Tom Silver in Washington, D.C. He does a nice job of pulling together a lot of different public policy issue pollings and political polls and whatnot. But just quickly to become a more savvy consumer of the polls too, when you see a poll across the cable crawl or someone who knows nothing about polling talking about it on TV and or in the newspaper, the thing you want to do is go on the website, because the rules compel all of us, if you release a piece of polling data from a poll, you must release all of them. And when you go on the website, you will be astonished at how, say, the New York Times features 3 or 4 of the questions in their story. And we can argue about, are the questions biased, was the sampling right and all, but when you go on the website, you realize they ask 70 questions. So the self-selection wasn't just in the respondents, it wasn't just in the question wording, the self-selection was in deciding which of the 3 or 4 data points should be included in the story. And the rest of this stuff is on the website. So they've complied with their obligation to publish the entire poll, but not to the people who only see the headline, who only read that story, and then who turn on the TV show that night where they're repeating that story, not going on the website. So that's something too. If you want to read polls and you're reading a poll, my one answer to you would be to go on the website and look at the full poll. And if you're not satisfied that they were completely honest in reporting that, you should write a letter to the ombudsman, or you should call them. But I think generally, the hotline is great. National Journal's hotline, they give everybody pretty equal coverage. They're pretty good. Anyone else? Great. Thank you all very much. Good luck to you.